Well, Miriam, you are a very popular speaker. I think there's a lot of interest in this topic. This is great.
Yeah, I'm not
Okay.
sure it's me. I think it's the topic, but I see some familiar names out there now.
Excellent. Well, we're at 8:02, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Ann Jacobstein. I am class of 2007 and a member of the Alumni Council. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this SWAT talk. A few little housekeeping items before we dive into it. This session is being recorded and will be available on the college website in a couple of weeks. You are encouraged to use the chat tool to submit questions throughout the session. Our speaker tonight is going to give a presentation for the first half, and then we'll transition to Q&A. I will be moderating that. So please submit your questions. We do ask that you add your class year. It's always nice to see the different age ranges when you submit your questions. And with that, I would like to introduce our speaker tonight, Miriam Wallace, class of 84. So Miriam is a professor of English and Gender Studies at New College of Florida, which is a small public liberal arts all honors college in Sarasota. Her scholarly interests include early feminisms, psychoanalysis, political fiction, public speech, and most recently, disability-related approaches. With Dr. Mona Narain, she is co-editor for Transits, Literature, Thought, and Culture with Bucknell University Press. And New College, where she is a professor, has been in the news recently after Governor DeSantis' appointment of 6 trustees to the board of 13 with an explicit mandate to remake this woke college into a Hillsdale of the South. So tonight's session will be very, very interesting as we hear about academic freedom. So Miriam, with that, I will pass it over to you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. I need to open with a disclaimer, so I'm going to start there. I am not speaking for New College of Florida. I am speaking as an alumna of Swarthmore College, as an experienced educator and a part-time administrator in higher education, and as a citizen of the United States. Extramural speech, we understand, is protected by the First Amendment. My focus tonight, though, will be on the concept of academic freedom as it pertains to higher education, where I have some real expertise, but I'm happy to entertain, and I hope that we will have a somewhat broader discussion at the end of it. I'm going to talk, I think, for about 30 minutes. We'll see how that plays out. It's a little hard to read a room when everybody's in a webinar. So what I'd like to do is start by talking a little bit about specifics of what I've seen happen at New College in my part of Florida, try to paint a little bit of the larger national picture of how free speech and academic freedom are being mobilized or called into question, and hold some time, I hope quite a bit, for questions and discussion at the end, because I really am looking for insights, input, senses of what's happening in the broader national frame. So I am going to share my screen now. All right. So this is my little emblem from my 18th century work on public speaking. So those of us who work in higher education tend to assume that academic freedom as a baseline. The liberty to conduct research, to choose our methodologies, to draw conclusions without interference. Individual instructors have the right, we assume, to select course content, a pedagogical approach, and design their own assignments to achieve the outcomes that they're trying to reach. And this comes to some degree, this was sort of codified in 1915 and then again in 1940 by the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors. And you have a chunk of their statement there. And I just want to point out that academic freedom is thus distinct from but related to our rights as citizens to free speech under the First Amendment. And my point really is that this comes with responsibilities. So if we take a look at the things I highlighted on the slide, you see full freedom in research and publication of the results. We won't get into the money stuff. Freedom in the classroom and discussing their subject, but, and here's the responsibility, right? They should be careful not to introduce into their teaching controversial matter that has no relation to their subject. So you can't just bring up something that you're interested in without it having a reason for being part of the conversation. And so when we speak or write as citizens, instructors, academics, faculty should be free from institutional censorship or discipline, but we need to remember our special position in the community imposes special obligations. So with expertise and a platform and frankly power comes some responsibilities. Okay, whoops. There we go. So the reason I want to address academic freedom and free speech is that recent events all across the country, and I'm sure some of you have seen them, what I might call politicized attacks on diversity initiatives and on queer and trans people, challenges to an AP African American history curriculum and draft that led to changes in that curriculum, and the complete remaking of a small public liberal arts college in the name of free speech and civil discourse is the kind of thing that I think should interest all of us. So this slide I think really just sets up the First Amendment, which is often taken to try to prevent institutions from regulating the speech, particularly of students, actually. And then academic freedom addresses the rights within educational contexts for teaching and learning and research. And this is faculty and students and everybody else. Okay, so I'm going to go to my next slide. So here's the timeline of what actually happened at New College, and I've got everything exactly right, but this is pretty close. So just a little bit of background. New College, unlike Swarthmore, is a public institution. We are part of the state university system. We are the only standalone small liberal arts college in that system. Some years ago, under former Governor Jeb Bush, the state moved to a system of performance metrics. And if you're interested in higher education, you'll see this in a number of places. Texas also uses it, a number of other states use it. And that's a system by which the 11 universities are judged on a kind of rubric or metrics. There are 10 metrics, and they have 10, it's a scale of 10. And they include things that are things you really would want to see, right? Like, what's the percentage of students graduating in 6 years? What's the percentage of students majoring in what we call here areas of strategic emphasis, which means prominently means STEM, but also languages, international studies, the percentage of graduates making $35,000 or more within 1 year of graduation. You know, the Board of Governors of the state, so the state higher ed system basically determines what these metrics are going to be. If you score high, you may get a funding bonus, so you may get a lot of money. If you score at the bottom, you may get no extra money, or in some cases, you can actually have your baseline budget cut. So it's kind of it's a model borrowed from corporate America that is sort of aiming to create pressure on institutions to meet goals that are being set. It's been a problem for us because we're very, very small. And so in some cases, 5 students one way or the other can actually put us into the money 1 year or out of the money that year. So it's so that has left us, I think, somewhat vulnerable to what's just happened. So to get back to the timeline, on January 6th of this year, the governor of the state appointed 6 new trustees. He has the legal authority to appoint 6 of our 13 trustees. They're usually staggered. In this case, 3 trustees were asked to step down so that a full 6 could be appointed at the same time. On Wednesday, the 25th, 2 of our new trustees, Christopher Rufo and Eddie Spear. Christopher Rufo is from the Manhattan Institute. Eddie Spear runs a Christian academy up the road from us. Who had just been appointed new trustees, invited the faculty and the staff to a meeting. And I just want to flag that this was very unusual. Trustees tend to show up because we have very strict sunshine laws. Trustees are not supposed to talk to each other outside of a meeting. In fact, they're supposed to be very careful even about having lunch together. More than 2 of them, I think, can't meet at all unless it's in a publicly noticed meeting. So when they invited us, we didn't know what this meant. It had never happened before. Some of us have attended trustees meetings. Some of us have been invited to present at trustees meetings. But generally, the trustees come together and they kind of go through a docket of things that they need to do. They're sort of final approval on almost everything that happens at the very high level in the college. We were invited to this meeting at which they sort of filled us in on some of the things. And we'd already seen a lot of information out on social media, but this was the first time that actually as a group we had had any conversation about the desire to remake New College from a liberal arts college that was sort of known for being progressive, that was known for being very queer friendly, that was known for being for having students who, you know, have funny hair colors and seem pretty lefty, into a college modeled on Hillsdale College in Michigan, which is a private Christian college with a very particular liberal arts core. You know, and this had all been announced on social media, but they actually started to hear about it here. On the 26th, the Board of Governors appointed a new trustee, which was also there, right? They decided not to renew somebody who'd asked to be renewed and to appoint a new person who came with a similar profile to the other 6. On the 31st, the very first Board of Trustees meeting was held, and it took a while, but they made several moves. One was to abolish our the equivalent of our diversity, equity, inclusion access. And the second was to fire the president. This is all public record. None of this is particularly secret or hidden. You can find plenty of information about it out there in the media. About an hour before that meeting, there was actually information floating around on social media that they were going to, that Richard Corcoran, who is the former, he's a former Board of Governors member and also he was the head of the Florida Department of Education, that he would be appointed as our president. This was before they'd fired the president. So that happened at that meeting. Corcoran was appointed as interim president. There have been several, then there was a flurry of trustees meetings. They usually don't happen that often, but they had a lot of business to get through. Our new president arrived technically on March 1st. He actually was here on February 27th. And on the 3rd of March, the dean of our Office of Outreach and Inclusive Excellence was fired, and we found out about it. There's still been no campus announcement. Actually, we found out about it through the media, like everybody else. It was announced in the Washington Post. Was the first interview with them. 7th of March, our new VP of Enrollment Management was announced, who's also somebody out of the Florida Department of Education. So this is sort of a timeline of the things that have happened. So at the beginning, they said, we're going to remake this school, and you can sort of see the moves to do precisely that. So essentially, all of our higher administration has been replaced. The diversity office was closed. 3 of the 4 faculty were moved to other positions. And that was tricky because that's the office that handles veteran affairs. That's the office that was handling a Mellon grant. That office did a lot of things on the campus that this is why it took the trustees 2 meetings. They hadn't quite realized the scope of what they were proposing to close down. But you know, we're seeing this this move is happening now in many states at public institutions. So that's one of the reasons I sort of wanted to give you the big picture here. Oops, I want to go forward. All right, so the AAUP lists threats to academic freedom as these 4. Program redesign without shared governance. That has not happened yet, but when you make changes to things like core curriculum, general education, etc., the AAUP says the best practices that faculty should be involved. It's usually thought at higher ed institutions that the faculty really owns the academic program. The president provides vision, a provost tells you, how to move and where to go, and may ask the faculty to think about developing new programs, or may make a decision to close down a program, but the faculty usually own it. We've been told that there are plans to establish a classical liberal arts curriculum, and they intend to bring in some new faculty potentially to teach this. We're still waiting to find out what's going to happen there, or if we'll just be told what we're going to be teaching now. Ad hominem condemnations or disciplinary action. I think there's a legal case out there. I think it's been talked about in the Washington Post article on the part of our former dean of the Office of Outreach and Inclusive Excellence, suggesting that firing was based on who they are. So that may fit this. That's the only one I know of so far. Funder influence, I think there are questions about, they've just replaced the director of our foundation, which is our fundraising arm. The previous director retired. I've heard through the grapevine that some other people have been fired, that we haven't heard anything officially. Guns on campus, I'll just say there are a lot of bills out there. Florida is not the only state that are moving to make it easier to have guns on campus, concealed carry with or without a permit. So these are the four things that AAUP has flagged historically, and I just want to say that we may in fact be seeing all of these. And the reason I'm bringing it up is not just that we need to be concerned about New College, but that I think what we're seeing here is it's been very explicitly stated on social media that this is a model of what some of the people who've devised this would like to take to other states and take forward to other institutions. And you can just look, if you're interested, Florida House Bill 999 has gotten a lot of press, and it would make it illegal to teach critical race theory, gender ideology, which essentially it makes it impossible for students to major in fields that rely on concepts like intersectionality, critical race theory, gender theory, etc. Ohio just put forward a bill the other day, so just keep your eyes out on those. Closing down DEI offices, making diversity statements illegal is happening in a number of places. Just up the road, State College of Florida just fired somebody who worked there for, I think, I want to say 40 years, might be 20 years, who had been pulled out of the faculty to lead their DEI office. So this is something that is in the works, and it is expanding. Let me just scroll myself down a little bit. Right. So where is this coming from? So this is partly why I want people to be thinking about this. It's very clear that what happened at New College looked quite spontaneous and quite quick, was really planned out behind the scenes. And I will say that it was also pretty clear from the very strong social media presence that one of the major goals was to get as much media attention and to create to emphasize a culture wars narrative, right? So there were stories about, oh, the professors are terribly liberal. Then it was like, well, it's not the professors, it's really the students are holding the professors hostage. So there are various ways of going at it, but this is set up to be a culture war. And I think we need to be very careful about that, because I, for one, don't want to be in a culture war battle. I don't think that's what's actually going on, but I do think that's a very tempting story for media to want to tell. And so that's part of why I've wanted to make an effort to talk about the good things that we do, what kind of an institution we are, what my former students have gone on to do, and to sort of, just tell the other narrative. So I'll just put that out there. The other thing we saw was that, the minute this was announced, unless institutional leadership wants to get fired, they really can't say much of anything. And all of our, our state, Florida has, like I said, very open sunshine laws. All of our emails are open to freedom of information requests. And in fact, our personal emails and personal phones may be, if we are in the kind of position where we might be discussing policy on them. This is true for the Board of Trustees as well. So it's not just, it's not just faculty, but what it kind of boils down to is the president needed to be very careful what she said, because the governor has the absolute legal right to appoint the trustees, and they do have the final say on a lot of things on our campus. So if she didn't want to be embattled and fireable for cause, she needed to find a way to be potentially open to working with new people. It was also clear that from some of the social media posts, again, that they knew the mechanisms by which you can fire tenured faculty, and there are ways to do it. Financial exigency is the most extreme. Closing departments is pretty common. Firing people for cause, things like, failing to show up to teach your classes, not doing your job, not doing your job well. Those are in fact grounds for firing tenured faculty. They also had access to institutional documents, which is totally their right as trustees. So things like SWOT analyses, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and I forget what the other one is. but basically these are sort of standard things that you do, external studies, and they were able to lift some sound bites out of those to make a case that we were a place that lacked civil discourse, that was silencing conservative points of view, and that had a culture problem, which was the rationale for why we needed to be, we needed a major change agent to come in and remake things. But I've learned from talking to other people that there is a somewhat larger scenario. So, and I'll mention this book by Isaac Kamola and Wilson, Free Speech and Coke Money, Manufacturing and Culture War. I will say it is a little sensationalist, but it has some real research in it. And this is something that they lifted from a 1996 paper in a journal, Philanthropy, that was essentially laying out a sort of a plan for how to get more conservative voices into higher education. So this is something that certain kinds of conservatives have been worried about for a long time, that that higher education is in some way unfriendly or in some way imbalanced. There's a really interesting discussion to have about why that might be the case and what it really looks like and where that's true and where that's not true. But the plan here that I think is really interesting is that you start with that there's a desire for academic credibility. So the pyramid starts at the top, and then you go to think tanks, and we can all think of the think tanks. I mean, several of our trustees come from the Manhattan Institute, the Claremont Institute. I think immediately of the Hoover Institute, right? These institutes are all over the place. And they produce, they produce talking points, they produce findings, they produce data, they produce speakers. And then you get out into mainstream media, social media, transforming these ideas into sound bites and points that are accessible to and can get picked up by a general public. So there's a real communications element here. And then you get into the laws. So I think this is really interesting. When I saw it, I suddenly thought, this makes a certain amount of sense. And around here, the narratives are DEI is discrimination, right? Gender ideology is confusing our children. They need to be taught that there are two genders and two sexes and they go together. Trendy ideologies and zombie studies are ruining classical liberal arts. That the zombie studies line has actually been out there. So that's the kind of larger picture I wanted to point out. So what I'm kind of coming to is, why should we defend academic freedom? And what I sort of hoped you'll go away with is a sense that in fact we should, because I think we should. So the AAUP subcommittee report stated that it's imperative that we make a case for academic freedom at both public and private institutions. Being private alone will not save you. We're all in the same boat to some degree, not as a matter of law. This is not about laws. This is about, quote, a principle vital to the effective functioning of institutions of higher education, higher learning. So, academic freedom, these are sort of my points, right? It supports the open study and exploration for students with faculty and instructors as responsible guides and scholarly models. It supports research and scholarship to follow where it leads without fear. The idea, this is how we get to discoveries and insights and new work, is that people are able to follow things through and see where they go, even if it's not popular or even if it feels uncomfortable. It does not absolve teachers or instructors from responsibility to the institution, which is why my disclaimer was there at the beginning, or responsibility to students. You can't abuse students, you can't mistreat students, right? Academic freedom does not let you do those things in the classroom, or responsibility to the profession or in your public conduct. And I mentioned this before, but yes, tenured faculty can be fired or terminated, but there are very clear processes for doing this. And there's a reason for that as well. And I pulled these other factoids from PEN America. If you don't know them, they're a really useful free speech organization. I have a lot of respect for them. Between June of 2021 and 2022, PEN has tracked more than 2,500 book ban incidents involving more than 1,600 book titles and 1,500 authors and illustrators. And I'm willing to bet it's much higher now, because I've heard from librarians, school librarians, about how many cases of contested books they're getting. And in some cases, it's a single person who may not even have children in the school who is filing hundreds and hundreds of cases. Every single one has to be investigated And in many schools, you have a single media specialist who has to do that investigation, or you have a committee that it has to go to, and it's just easier to pull the books. In 2022, there were 137 gag order bills. This is PEN America's term for these bills that are trying to silence certain kinds of academic speech, introduced in 36 states. So this was just bills that were introduced. That's up from 54 in 22 states in 2021. And of those in 2022, 19 were actually enacted. The so-called Stop Woke Act bill in Florida is currently hung up in court. It's been, the court has called it unconstitutional twice, but even though it is not actually law, it is already having effect. We have good reports of people already changing what they teach, changing titles, cutting readings out in response to these. So in some ways, getting them through the law is less the goal than creating the kind of chilling effect that we're actually seeing. And this is something I just think all US citizens should be concerned about. So for those of you out there who might be faculty like me, or instructors or teachers in higher ed, a few quick points, and I'm collecting more of these, so I'm happy to have more. Know your faculty handbook, your collective bargaining agreement, if you have one. Know what your local two-party recording laws are. About 2 years ago, Florida passed a law that makes it legal. We are a two-party consent state, which means that I can't record you, you can't record me without permission, except in the classroom. If you're my student, you may record me in the classroom without my knowledge. Presumably so that you have evidence if you think that I've said something I shouldn't say. Freedom of information laws, know how those work and what can be requested and how. Be prepared with your talking points. What are the things you want to say that are going to reach a persuadable general audience about why academic freedom is a public good, is a shared good, right? It's not just something special that professors get to do. And think about who are your spokespersons who will be able to make those points if things get really tight. Are you talking about faculty emeritus, emeriti? Are you talking about those who are going to be retiring in the same year? These are things that if we had been prepared, we might have been better able to respond when things started happening. Be careful about falling into the liberal arts versus careers trap. I just mentioned this because there's been a lot of, this is a very long story. I'll try to make it short. There's a little bit of, there's a lot of pressure in academia these days to show the traditional liberal arts fields like English literature, like classics, like philosophy, actually lead to viable careers, right? This has been floating around for a while. And one of the ways of doing it is to really emphasize career skills, career training. Sometimes faculty get nervous about that language because it seems to suggest that it's only about an end goal of getting a job and making money. That there's not a benefit to reading widely and studying widely. So I think we are sensitive to that, and I also kind of fall into that camp to some degree. But what I will say is that one of the things I've seen is this concept of classical liberal arts, which means a very specific set of things. If you look at Hillsdale's curriculum, it sets itself in opposition to the careers move. So that particular sensitivity on our part can actually be used to press for versions of liberal arts that we might not be so happy with. One of the talking points from Penn that I think is very handy: college students are adults. They need exposure to a wide range of debate and issues to become active, engaged, and educated citizens. I feel protective of my students. I have a tendency to want to talk about them, as young people. I try to avoid calling them kids, but we do. I think it's really important, particularly in this atmosphere, to remind people we are talking about adults who can make decisions for themselves about what they want to read and what they don't want to read, what they want to watch and what they don't want to watch. And that if we want them to become the citizens they should be, they need to be able to make those decisions. Action items: use your public media, share why academic freedom matters to you and yours. Become involved where it matters. If you can do it, serve on school boards, serve in city government, participate in events that cross between the campus and the community. You know, that what I've heard is that it's work. It's not hard work, but it does take time. But it means that you have a voice at the table in the places that matter. Speak out about the economic as well as the intellectual arts and arts values of your institutions of higher education. We have to learn how to talk about what we bring to communities. Often institutions of higher education are one of the major economic employers, one of the major what's the word I want? Economic engines in their communities. And we're often a little shy about that, and we probably shouldn't be. Build your community support. Internships can do this, exchanges can do this, book clubs, public talks. Ollie, if you know anything about the Osher Institutes for Lifelong Learning, they're great groups and they really tie people in. And finally, if you care about it, protect real diversity and inclusion. And I think what that means is we have to weave these ways of thinking and these ways of being attentive to who's at the table and who needs to be at the table throughout. Not just, it's not good enough to just have an office where you put all that work. That can become isolated. In fact, people who work in DEI often complain about feeling sidelined and isolated. For all of us as citizens, talking points, college students are adults, right? That whole thing again, they need exposure to a wide range of debate and issues to become active, engaged, educated citizens. Another thing, and I'm getting this from Penn America again, there have been quite good studies. Most Americans, and this includes people who who vote Republican, people who think of themselves as socially and politically conservative. Most Americans think all perspectives should be included, and they are opposed to banning books. So when it's talked about as book banning or gag orders, they're opposed to it. When it's talked about as protecting children from inappropriate ideas, you get a much more mixed response. Action items, again, public media. Use your social media or public media to share why academic freedom matters to you and yours. I think anybody who can get an op-ed there right out there right now, especially in the papers that are read by a broader, not already the converted, would be great. Become involved where it matters, against school board, city government. Invite someone to your book group, theater talkbacks. I do those. Speak out about the economics as well as the intellectual values of the institution of higher education in your community. Offer internships or experiential opportunities. Swarthmore's extern program, is a fantastic example of what that can look like. And those things really make a difference. They help students, but they also help to build, to bind together educational institutions and their larger communities. And right, more than ever, I think we need good op-ed articles. We need them in places the general public sees. We need good social media. And we need people who can write and speak up as citizens, not just those of us who are teachers or college faculty. It means a lot coming from the general citizenry. And that's it. I can stop sharing now. But thank you so much for letting me talk to you about all this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was incredibly informative, and we have a lot of questions coming in. Please keep on sending them. And so I'll start with some questions that came up earlier on when you were going through the situation right now at New College. First, Elizabeth Scheuer had a question about the AAUP guidelines, because have they truly not been updated in 83 years?
It's a great question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but everything I see goes back and cites that 1940 statement. So I think some things have been I think there have been some updates if you look at it from the 70s and so forth, but that's still the baseline document from what I can tell. Wow. And I'm not an expert on this, but I'm learning.
Did Ethan Landis wrote in, did any board members refuse to resign or be fired?
It has been reported that 2 of them have called themselves fired, that they were basically forced to step down and didn't want to. One of them, I think this is, I'm trying to think if this is all out in public. I think it really is. At least one of them is an alum and has been pretty vocal about having been pushed into stepping down.
What actions on campus or testing rank failures were cited to justify the transformation? So
There
it was
really,
not really
there really
communicated.
wasn't any. No, it was, look, here's the thing. I think the talking point, and this is where the Kamola book comes in, right? The talking point is, campuses are shutting down conservative speech. They don't have enough conservatives on their faculty. Look at all the cases where somebody's been brought in to speak, and then students have erupted in protests, right? These always make media noise. And then they point to them and they say, and you were like this. So, here's the one that we're going to remake. So that's why I think, falling into the culture wars thing is really tricky. And if you do have a controversial speaker, student groups have been funded by external groups to bring in controversial speakers. There is a speaker network. We've seen that this has been going on for like the last 20 years, right? We're just so small. It's never happened on our campus. So we don't have an example of, Ann Coulter wanting to come speak and being, heckled or denied. It's never happened at New College, but it has happened elsewhere. And that's used as sort of a larger rationale for why this needs to happen. And we happen to be the model that they can use because we're small and vulnerable.
I see some people raising their hands. If you can type your question in on the Q&A, I think that's the easiest way to get your questions in. Wilbert Greenhouse Jr. asked, what are the academic consequences for students learning and for professional future because of these changes?
Yeah, a lot of that's unclear right now. We are accredited by SACS COC, which is the Southern Accreditation Group. They do most of the Southeast. There are a number of other accrediting groups, and this is too much detail, but we'll probably be changing accrediting group. In fact, everybody in Florida probably will. That's another law that they passed, that we can't use the same accrediting group twice in a row. And there's reasons for that I don't want to really get into, but right. So under accreditation, when you close a program, you have to have a plan to what they call teach it out. So students who have already declared that major should be guaranteed to complete their degree with that major. We are assuming that is in fact the way it will go. That's the normal process, but a lot of what's happened has been so abnormal that we're a little unclear on that. I did hear that President Corcoran did say that was the plan, but we certainly haven't heard that from the trustees.
We have a few questions here on book bans that I'll combine. Ethan with another question, and Neil Ottenstein. Can teachers recommend books to their students if they've been removed from the school library? And if you can talk a bit about book bans extending up through the college level and the justification proposed.
Yeah, so far the book bans are pretty much K through 12. But although I will say that the ban on teaching critical race theory actually named certain writers. Some of the writers who were named were people like, and I was surprised that somebody had clearly done their research. So Angela Davis, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, who actually was visiting on this campus for a number of years. So I know her, I knew her, a number of students knew her. So that's not exactly a book ban, but it's if you can't teach these concepts, and these are the writers, Kimberly Crenshaw, right? These are the writers that are associated with it. The way I read that is you can't put those people on your syllabus, and that is higher ed. I don't know about recommending books that are banned. Libraries often do like a banned book week where they put books out. Sometimes they put them in brown wrappers. I think a lot of them are changing their programming. It's just a little too dangerous right now. They're finding ways to do other things.
Neil has another question. Do you know what the college president did after being replaced?
So because President Oker was fired without cause, she retains her position as tenured faculty. It's pretty standard when you bring in somebody at the level of provost, president, dean, that you bring them as tenured so they can rotate back into the faculty when their term is done, unless there's a reason not to. If she'd been fired without cause, she would have lost some of her benefits and she would not have rotated back into the faculty. So she's effectively English faculty now, and she's on a year's sabbatical, which is also pretty standard. So there was some kind of a deal worked out. I don't know the ramifications of it. There was a little bit of mention of it at the Board of Trustees meeting. And that's about all I know. I know pretty much what everybody else in the public knows.
Cynthia Gray, class of 62, thank you for including your class year. Will it be possible to get copies of the slides that were shown? I do know this
Sure.
is being recorded, so you can go back and it'll probably be a couple days, maybe a week or so. So you can always rewatch this. The slides will be available there. Jim Colvin, class of 71. Does it help to deluge interim president with emails of protest? And I think it would be one question for the general public, another if maybe you are a resident of Florida.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I appreciate the thought. I really do. I think the time to do that was when this was all breaking. I'm not sure it does much good now. The thing that's interesting at this point is, trustees they kind of come in, they do their thing, they go. They're not long-term residents on the campus. The president, though, is here and has an investment in seeing the institution thrive, right? That's going to prove that's how they prove the value of this project. So so I'm just not sure what's useful at this point. Yeah, I don't have a really good answer for that. But I think keeping your eye on the larger picture, like what is, I think letters about laws, letters to legislators, even if you're not in state, I think that probably does help a lot, because these things are passing easy and fast. And once they get through, then they become a model. So like Texas has already copied some of ours, Ohio has copied some of ours. If you believe in academic freedom, I think a lot of these just really need to not pass. And that's where I'm speaking like a political citizen, right? That's clearly not my purview as a professor of English.
Peter Bogg, class of 84. I think we've talked about this with removing books.
Yeah, hi, Peter.
Oh yeah, another 84. Kat Clark has a great question. Could you share the name again of who created that structure for social change pyramid in your slide?
Yes, so that slide comes from a page in a book by Isaac Kamola, Kamola, and his co-author's last name is Wilson, called Free Speech and Coke Money. You can easily pick it up. It's not theirs. It comes from a conservative writer from 1996, and it was apparently leaked by somebody who leaked it basically to people who weren't on board with the project.
Great. Next question. How did a group of 6 appointees from the state of Florida take control of a board of 13, assuming the remaining 7 didn't vote as a block?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So it's six the governor appoints. The board of governors gets to appoint 5. 1 is a faculty member and 1 is a student member. So there was 1 who carried over from the board of governors who had been chair and stepped down when all this stuff happened. But let's just say they have a very clear majority. So board of governors replaced someone who has to be reappointed with someone who has a background from the Heritage Foundation. So that gives them 7. And then some of the other trustees, who've come out of industry have kind of gone along with what the 7 are pushing.
Just doing some reading beforehand, it seemed like in a number of the votes, there were 3 people that were holding out, and so pretty strong majority.
It's complicated, right? If you're going to sit on that board and you have any hope of working together, when do you push back? When do you go along with something? When things are kind of a fait accompli, is it what kind of resistance is worthwhile? What kind of authority are you going to have? I mean, I'm sure everybody's sitting there, and I haven't talked to anybody. This is just my guess looking at it from the outside, but I assume everybody is sitting there trying to figure out what's the best thing that they can do under the circumstances. But
What has the impact been on your admissions numbers?
We are waiting to find out about that. There's a lot of unverified information floating around, but we have heard that there are students and parents who have withdrawn their applications. I know for a fact that a couple of my advisees are transferring to other schools. They are expecting the incoming class next fall to be much smaller than it should be, but we shall see. They're prepared for a small incoming class. They understand this happened late in this. I will say this happened right at the point where students have made their decisions. So we will see what happens. They do point to Hillsdale, which apparently had a very large incoming class, and say that, they're pretty sure they can get the class up in another couple of years. But I think that the proof will probably be in the pudding with that one. Because colleges, if there are no students coming in, you don't have a college anymore.
And Fran Brokaw, class of 76, had asked a similar question about
Mhm.
if students were looking to transfer.
Yes,
And-
Hampshire College has actually offered to take students at new college tuition
Oh.
levels. And it's hard to know how to feel about that, right? Because if all the students transfer to Hampshire, that may be very good for them. That of course depletes new college even faster. So, and what you all may or may not know is in higher ed, there's a lot of anxiety about the college age, the traditional college age, college prepared population is shrinking, and we know that. It's growing in some states. Florida has been one of them. There are lots of colleges that would love to come to Florida and pick up our students. So we'll see.
Robert McLaughlin, is there a movement to organize colleges into a national force to resist the threat of conservative war on free thought and open education at American universities? There's strength in numbers, noise is needed.
Yep, that's kind of why I've been talking very quietly to professional groups and now to this group, where I feel like I can probably put this information out there. But it's tricky for us to talk too freely on open public media.
Would Penn America be a good resource for that?
Yep, Penn America has been great. If you've seen media, there probably are people behind it.
Wonderful. This is an interesting one from Elizabeth Strom, who is
Mhm.
at USF. Just wanted to note that legislation has also created a post-tenure review, and this year is passing legislation that will undermine faculty unions. These will make it that much more difficult to resist.
Yes. Hi, Elizabeth. Yeah. And this is not just Florida. There are other states. I want to say West Virginia. Maybe it was just one university, but they're trying to do this, reducing the kinds of protections that tenure give, doing an annual review and making it possible for the president and the trustees essentially to decide whether a faculty member is no longer meeting their obligations. We have a very complex process. There are a lot of layers to who reviews our files. We get reviewed every 7 years as it is. We used to get reviewed every 5. They want to make it annual, and they don't want the faculty involved in it, which is going to really change things dramatically. They also don't want the faculty involved in hiring. They want to do, there are moves afoot to make it possible to hire university faculty just with the presidents and the boards of trustees, which is that's just unheard of.
We have an update on the AAUP, it seems like, from
Oh, yes. The
Jeffrey
Chicago statement.
Ryan. So July 2014, University of Chicago published a statement on academic freedom meant to update the statement from AAUP. I encourage all to have a look. It's referred to as the Chicago statement. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jeff.
And the state system in Florida, our board of governors signed on to the Chicago statement a few years back. It's actually been cited at us as one of the reasons they need to make us new. So
Cynthia Gray, class of 62. Am I correct that with the conservative Republican presidency, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 would present similar threats to any institution of higher ed receiving federal money, including federal loans to students? If I am correct, are people planning an attack?
I don't know the ins and outs of that act. I'm not a lawyer, but I will say that because for instance, Hillsdale College is not only private, it doesn't accept any federal money, which means, for instance, it doesn't have to abide by Title IX law. So I think there's something there to think through.
Andrea Rabinowitz, class of 1949, have you asked for help from the ACLU?
I think they're different groups that are in touch with different people, and I'm not sure who's in touch with whom. You know, and it's again, is it about our little college, or is it about the larger moves in the state, the larger moves nationally?
So Worry Morris, class of 04, I think there's something, a little twist on the question here. We've been talking about students not accepting or students transferring. What about the faculty or faculty leaving?
Yeah, it's again, you know, not a lot of open information. You know, some people are, you know, some students have dug their heels in and said they can't really change the culture if we're still here. Some faculty are trying to hang on and see what they can do. There's a strong commitment to the students, right? It's like Swarthmore. It's a place where students and faculty really care about each other. We're investing in each other, and it's hard. But I know some people are looking to leave. It's actually very difficult for academics at a certain stage in their career to move. There aren't a lot of jobs out there. Colleges and universities tend to want to hire people straight out of graduate school, not somebody who's very, very senior. You know, we know that there are lots of PhDs out there looking for jobs. So it's, I don't think higher ed has thought through what this kind of thing might mean in terms of people needing to move or being able to move. So it's a complicated question.
As a follow-up to that, Caitlin Killian, class of 95, is curious, would you advise faculty and staff to not take jobs at university in states like Florida? And we've talked about the students, and particularly I'd say at public universities and colleges.
That's a really hard one, because you know, I don't want to see my colleagues at other institutions. I don't want to see good institutions go down the tubes. So I don't want to say exactly what you should do, but I would look very hard at it. You know, what is the school offering? Is it private or is it public? And there was a report today. I think it showed up in the Washington Post, and it also showed up in a thing called University Business. That's a higher ed magazine, and there was a study done that showed that students heading off to college are looking very hard and determining not to go to some states. And one of the big pushes is there are quite a few, we've heard about this for a while, that you know, some students don't want to go to a state that has a very, very early abortion law, where they aren't sure that they can get the health care, the reproductive health care that they think they might need. So I think this is having an impact already. And if I were looking at my child, I would think very hard about where I would be willing to let them go to college right now.
We're tight on time. We've got 5 minutes. I'm scanning through these. Let's see. Linda Habas Mantel, class of 60, visited New College as an evaluator of the bio department back in the 90s and was really impressed by what the students did. How is this upheaval affecting science and research? Great question.
That is a great question. You know, I think the people here are pretty amazing. They are teaching their classes, they are running their labs, they are still doing it. The students are still doing work, they're still presenting at conferences. I'm going to take 3 to London this summer to present their work at a conference. I mean, you know, I don't know how people do it, but they just keep on keeping on. And that's really what's keeping things going. But I am particularly concerned that folks in the sciences are more movable, and that we may see, particularly people who are not tenured, we may see those colleagues move to other places, and that's going to put more pressure on the people who stay, right? So that's going to be a real challenge.
This is an interesting perspective. Leanne Probosco, class of 04. I'm a community college department chair in Oklahoma. We have such high rates of concurrent enrollment with high school students taking college classes that the K-12 library bans are impacting us directly. Our library and all public libraries in the state have had to get vendors to certify that they aren't sharing obscene material with us because we serve high school students. Someone just added a question and it dropped. A campus librarian has shared with us that means vendors like EBSCO are now censoring what academic journal articles our students can access. And in her opinion, they are taking a fairly broad and arbitrary approach.
Wow. See, what this tells me is we need to be in broader conversation. We need to be in conversation where we can with K through 12 teachers. We need to be in conversation with librarians, you know, because I think the isolation is what leaves us all vulnerable.
There's a question, can you expand upon how this can affect private colleges as well? I think with that Title VI question, we got a little into that. I know that's not your area of expertise, but any
Right.
thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Can you expand upon how this will affect private colleges?
Right. So I'm not entirely clear, but I did have a conversation with the president of a private college, and I said something about, you know, well, it's so much, you know, about publics being especially vulnerable. And she said, actually, privates can be very vulnerable. One thing is many privates are not unionized. So that may be part of the issue. It's unclear to me, you know, how these Florida laws might impact privates, might not. It's one of my questions, right? Because one option might be, you know, can our students move to one of the private colleges? So I think we're still trying to figure that out, you know, but the publics are certainly more vulnerable to government intrusion because they are government entities. I just want to say that I think public education is one of the most amazing things that the United States built in from the beginning. Public libraries are the other. That was unheard of at the time. The idea that, you know, you can't have an educated citizenry if you don't have access to education. And as grateful as I am to Swarthmore, I think losing public institutions would be a great loss for the college, right? For the country. So I just want to put that out there.
We just have 1 minute left. So Miriam, I'm going to give you that minute for any final thoughts you have. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. Thank you so much to everyone who attended. But Miriam, the floor is yours.
Right. Well, these were great questions. I so appreciate the audience. I so appreciate a sense of support out there. I think, you know, all of us have work to do. And I wanted to do this because I wanted to alert us to some of the work that we might not have realized is sitting in our laps right now. So thank you all.
Well, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation and conversation. Thank you everybody who joined, who asked questions. And if you have friends or family who are interested in this and couldn't join, this will be posted on the college website shortly. Thanks everyone, have a great night.